Hello everyone and welcome back to The Great Derelict, a podcast about everything and anything to do with science fiction, and this is a very special episode being beamed directly to The Bunker at Lawless. I'm your host Andy, and I'm joined today by two very, very special guests. Firstly, once again, Joanne Alexander has found herself here aboard The Derelict. How are you doing, Jo?
I'm great, Andy. How are you?
I'm very excited because today we have a very special, very, very special guest. We have the godfather, perhaps, of British comics. I'm joined by Mr. Pat Mills. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, Andy. Fine, yeah. Hi, everybody.
We are here to have a little chat about a couple of subjects. Myself and Joanne, last year, we did a podcast about martial law, one of your creators. And I thought, since you were available to have this chat, I would love to ask you a few questions about it, and also how it ties into your more recent work. So, I mean, just to get the ball going, can I ask you, who is martial law to you?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it? Well, he lays out his stall, doesn't he, in episode 1. I'm a hero hunter. I hunt heroes. Haven't found any yet. Now, I think it would be very easy to say he's someone who hates superheroes, and that's one layer. But I think if you go deeper, it's really about hating and challenging people and organizations who claim that they are heroic and are very often the polar opposite. Now, we probably won't go too deeply into that, but you were asking me what is martial law to me, and it is, if you like, a force that challenges all those bogus people and organizations in society. And you probably wouldn't want to ask me, well, who are you referring to? Because we've probably all of us got a long list of fake heroes. So to ascribe it to superheroes in a way is just a little bit unfair, because they are fictional for the most part, but they're, if you like, a convenient mask, a costume. They're really cosplay on, there are real life fake heroes, and I think ultimately they are the target of martial law, and he, uses fiction and uses superheroes to get into that.
I think it's a very interesting aspect of martial law is within the world of martial law, the superheroes are effectively government sanctioned. That we have the Screaming Firehawks and they have been used, and martial law himself works within that system. Is this a I don't want to say hypocrisy seems the wrong word to use there, but there's something about working within a system to take down that system. Is that part of him?
I suppose we all of us have worked within the system to change it, because what's the alternative, But yeah. He's only just within the system, isn't he, really? He's barely there, I think. The alternative is that you sort of go off grid in some way. There is a paradox there. which he himself acknowledges. He recognizes, the flaw in who he is.
He certainly does seem to be very much a guilt-ridden character as well. He wears his guilt like his badge.
Yeah, sure he does, yeah. I'm just shocked because I'm thinking, I wonder if that's my Catholic background.
Yes. So guilt just is everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, well, from original sin onwards, isn't it? I'm just wondering if that is the case. I think perhaps it is. I mean, I kind of rather pride myself on my absence of conventional Catholic guilt, but I am aware that they get you one way or another. So I always look for signs of it, and in the absence of it, it possibly comes out in my writing, like martial law.
It's the anti-establishment feeling that you have throughout your comics, that, as you say, challenging the system, which to me is you as well, Pat. You often challenge back again.
Yeah, I mean, all my stories are anti-establishment in one form or another. I mean, there's perhaps been the odd exception over the years. Dan Dare springs to mind, where he's much more, establishment, New Dan Dare and Eagle. But with that exception, I think everywhere else, the stories are challenging some aspect of the status quo, and I think that really just dates back to I suppose childhood and things like that, where you have various sort of mechanisms for getting through your childhood, and I think mine was to challenge the powers that be. So once you've got into that habit, you just carry on as an adult,
Well, and the other thing too about law is when you're a child and growing up in the 70s and the 80s, when law was formulating in your head, you'd actually said, we were surprised last year when we did the Great Derelict that martial law was actually set in 2020. Now, whenever we reviewed it last year, it seemed quite prevalent given the state of the world at that point. But is 2020, 2021 possibly the future that you had imagined whenever you'd first written law?
I think. I know people generally say, particularly with, say, 2000 AD, how prophetic it was in anticipating things like Donald Trump and all the rest of it. And I would say, on balance, that the future, all of us as science fiction writers, we're trying to imagine what's coming. And I'd say it's bleaker and smarter than we could ever have anticipated. It's clever, which is scary. It's scary. It's and I think one of the challenges is that totalitarianism, I don't think it has the visual persona that any of us might have imagined, like, for example, say, V for Vendetta. It doesn't have that sort of jackbooted visuals, unless you happen to be at a demonstration or something, I suppose, and you're being kettled, then it might have. But for the most part, there's this kind of affable face to oppression. And I'm thinking about it, thinking it's a hard one to do. And I think some of the responsibility for that must be a comic artist's door. Because the normal way to portray a villain is as someone who looks like Darth Vader. Do you know what I mean? You only got to look at Darth Vader. My God, this is a really evil guy. And one that I've use myself when, I was talking to artists. This is jumping ahead to Spacewalk, and I needed an evil-looking persona, and I suggested to the artist on Futon. I said, well, whatever his reality, I mean, Pope Benedict has a really sinister face. I mean, he's not photogenic, shall we say? But there's a lot of other people who are handsome, affable looking, and so on, and are responsible for all kinds of terrible things. And I don't think we pick that up in comics. Wait a minute. I'm contradicting myself there, because of course the public spirit in martial law.
I was about to say, public spirit is.
I was going to say that, just thinking about it, because I was thinking of Tony Blair and how he suckered whole generations, and he's got the affable skills of a double glazing salesman, and it's that form of evil that is actually the worst. It really is the worst, because the standard reaction to, the next generation of Tony Blairs that comes along, they say, oh no, he couldn't be a bad guy. I mean, he's handsome. You know what I mean? He's good looking. He's got a nice manner and all this kind of nonsense. And those are the kind of characters we do need to portray in comics. If comics has, amongst its various functions, is to identify evil. And as you were just saying there, Andy, we got it right with the public spirit. I mean, Kevin got it so right, didn't he? I mean,
well, that's I think martial law was certainly the first time I was familiar with it, where you had the villains were portrayed as, how we conceptualize good guys, public spirit, and we've seen that in other shows. It's people are probably most familiar with it in The Boys, just from the TV series, but it's something that we see in a lot of comic series now from DC and Marvel, where your initial thought of the good guy is, there he is, the Star-Spangled Man, and then it turns out that no, actually that's quite evil, and that was something that really I think martial law brought to us first, because as you say, evil is subtle these days. It has a mop of blonde hair and is an affable chap, isn't he? He's a chap. Evil is a chap.
Yeah. And he convinces, and we're obviously talking about Boris here. He convinces most people. I have, friends here where I live, and they seem highly intelligent people to me, but they actually use phrases like, "I would trust Boris, and I believe in him," and I'm thinking, how is that possible? So comics have all kinds of functions, but to identify evil, I think, is really important.
The world we have today, obviously law was inspired, that was the mid-'80s, so, you're picking up things from the Reagan administration and, things like Vietnam, and a lot of that is present there. What would law look like today if you were to write him?
Oh, that's a tough one, isn't it? I think I'm going by. I'm just trying to imagine if, and of course it's most unlikely because Kevin has retired and so forth. But supposing we were to do or today, and supposing the obvious targets, in other words, the kind of Batman and Superman and so on, that we've moved on from there, which I think we have really. Martial law is a lot more than featuring the parodying whatever is going on out there in superhero land, because it's dealing with much more profound issues. So putting that to one side, and all the various crossovers and so forth, if Kevin and I were sitting down, my guess is that we would look at some kind of modern scandal and say, let's portray this in martial law terms. So, for example, in the past, in a martial law text novel, we did the whole Christine Keeler Profumo scandal, which I have to say worked very, very. I mean, if Kevin had illustrated it, he'd still be working on it. It would be about 3 or 4 volumes.
Oh, that sounds good to me.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, we all of us know just how, artists, especially on a labour of love, they do take forever. And yeah, this was. So we did the whole Profumo scandal, and I can remember Kevin and I also talking about the whole Kennedy thing. Jack Kennedy, Marilyn Monroe, JFK, and so on. And I think you'll agree that you could probably easily see that, converted into superheroes there. And it's a natural, or rather, I think it's a natural with Kevin and I doing it, because it doesn't follow, oh, you can do that with anything. It is something to do with martial law, myself, and especially Kevin, because he has a very satirical sense of humor. He's not a frustrated writer, but there is a lot of creativity in him that needs an outlet in writing terms. And so his input on that would be probably astonishing. Apart from anything else, he knows all kinds of facts and figures about the Kennedys that I probably don't know. So I think we would probably be sitting down and saying, okay, who should we do? And we might look at the whole Trump thing, and what we might say to each other is, well, maybe someone else has done it, or even the other consideration. Do people really want to see a fictional version of the Trumps? Or has it been covered in The Simpsons or whatever? So we would have to ask ourselves all those questions. And I think my sort of initial feeling would be everybody's mauled the whole Trump mythos. We don't want to be too obscure either, but we don't want to be over focusing on something that's really in the public eye. So, but it would be something like the Trumps, perhaps. I mean, it mustn't be obscure. I'm just trying to think what other ones there are. I mean, the Boris Johnson and co. I don't think they've really got the status for for a martial law. Frankly, it's a little British and insular. But I am mildly interested in the shenanigans of that particular family, So there's probably someone else. So that's what we would do. We would look for something that was relatively topical, I think, and perhaps picking up on what Joanne was saying, we might really emphasize the pretty side to 1984. Maybe in the past that wasn't so important, but it's certainly important now.
Speaking of Kevin's wonderful artwork, I just as an interest, when you were looking through it, there's so much in every panel there. I mean, how much influence did you have in some of those background gags or visuals, or did you come across stuff, even later on that you would suddenly go, I missed that, but that's hilarious?
Mm-hmm. Good question.
Yeah. Well, I think, just thinking about it all, I think for the most part, that is really Kevin's unique signature. And I know on occasion various, a few artists, I think, have gone down that road. But I think it is very much Kevin's signature. So that the only name that comes to mind offhand is the late Martin Emond, who did Accident Man. And he would have a certain element of surrealism, with T-shirts changing captions in the middle of a drama, which is very left field, and it works. And I would imagine that I don't know if Simon Bisley probably would have come out with a little bit of graffiti here and there. I mean, it's fairly commonplace to have graffiti on guns, but down to Kevin, and of course, you know, it's not there on his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, as far as I'm aware. So it does come down specifically to martial law, and it's a great visual legacy to the character, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, every time I read it, I find something new.
Yes, I was going to actually say as well, with cosplaying martial law, one of the delights was adding Kevin's little statements on the various pieces. Even that I carry a hand grenade, and it says on it, "Kiss, kiss, boom, boom," and the gun says, "Suck this." So it was very important to get Kevin's, not only just his design for the costume itself, but also his little touches. That the martial law fans, I would pull something out and go, "Look at that." Slice and dice is on the knife as well, so when it comes out of the sheath, I'm able to show that actually Kevin even goes down to the finest details. His artwork is fantastic.
It is his unique signature, isn't it? And I think that's so good, because I think often in the comic world, a writer or an artist comes up with something, and before you know it, another artist is doing the same thing. And occasionally that's true for on the writer's side as well. But I think that one that really stands apart, and it's good for that reason.
I think you both complemented each other very well, and I don't want to presume on Kevin's part, but is it because you're both very similar, you know, ideologically, you know, and you share these thoughts about learn to speak, Andy, authoritarianism?
I'd say that was spot on. I think both of us. I think Kevin is actually probably more cynical than I am. I think he's quite suspicious of you know, anyone and everything, and probably thinks the worst of them. So I think that worked. That works very well. So we would you know, tend to find a subject that we both related to and build the story accordingly. The first story, I think, was very much my gig, because, you know, the long story with the public spirit and so forth, because I had this this plot that was you know, really lent itself to drama. In other words, someone who goes away to the stars and comes back and everybody's aged but he hasn't, kind of thing, you know. And I mean, there's a lot of great dramatic potential in that. But the furniture to embellish that plot line very much came from both of us, and it was fascinating seeing how it developed at the time, because we'd never really, I had no idea just how far Kevin was going to push it. And as you know, he pushed it quite a long way.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful scenes. Wonderful scenes. I can think of a few whenever they go into the red light district.
Yeah. I mean, the red light district is absolutely astonishing. I mean, it's great when an artist really has an opportunity like that to just really let go and put all manner of absurd ideas in and parody the world we live in. Yeah, it's fantastic. And yet, I suppose all of us probably feel this whenever we see something like that. Our natural desire is, can we have more of that? And of course, you know, as with everything in life, you know, it comes to an end, and it is sad when that happens.
Yeah, it is. I mean, with martial law stories as well, you read them initially for the story, and then you have to go back as well just to look at what was going on in the background scenes. Just
Yeah.
as Andy had mentioned as well, those little bits, you think, I didn't notice that the first time because I was so caught up in the storyline and the drama in it and the connection between the characters that I've missed. There's a character in the background doing something slightly unusual that I didn't notice before.
And that's the real charm of comics, isn't it? Which is why I'm so hostile to a very simplistic comic books. I mean, there is a place for them on occasion, you know, uh, but for the most part, I love books where you can just keep seeing things the more you look into them, and that is, I think, largely a British thing. I'm not that aware of any American comic artists going down that road. But Kevin is in a line of artists like that. The one that comes to mind would be, say, Leo Baxendale, who worked on the Beano, and there'd be all kinds of stuff going on in the background. Or Ken Reed, who also worked on the Beano and then did other things like Face Ache and Jonah for Hotspur and so on. There's an intensity to British art sometimes, which is absolutely wonderful. On occasion, it's there with American artists. Frank Miller's Dark Knight, for example, is really intense, and I think that's part of its appeal.
That's a very interesting point about British comics and just the amount of background storytelling you're getting in each panel. I know from some of the stuff I used to read, when I was younger on like, Superman and things, there'd be a very busy panel, but it wouldn't actually be telling you anything other than the main story. But there's so much depth when you're reading, be it martial law or be it 2000 AD or League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I mean, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen in particular, there's entire stories taking place in the background of panels that, you just sometimes want to sit and stare and go, I want to know that story now as well.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about British creators. What drives us? I mean, we are different to American creators and different to the French as well. Because, I mean, to my way of thinking, the French are definitely numero uno for me personally. I mean, they produce the most beautiful books. Now, they have really intense backgrounds, but in a totally different way. Whereas the things we're talking about are the humorous asides, the subplots that are going on, the strange looks that characters are giving each other. And you're thinking, what's all that about? What's going on there? But for the French, it's primarily architecture. So you get a very strong sense of place. In other words, they have beautiful backgrounds. City, you will see cars, bikes, Baroque architecture, all kinds of wonderful details. Whereas, as you know, for the most part in American comics, even though they're often set in the most fascinating cities in the world, New York and Los Angeles, you don't often get those detailed backgrounds. So there's three very separate cultural traditions there, aren't there?
I wonder as well, is it maybe because the French appreciate comics and storytelling, and that they're not embarrassed. They don't see it as simply a childish thing or something for a section of society you would think of as nerds. It's for everyone.
Yeah, it's so delightful, and I think it came as quite a shock to me that when I, as you doubtless know, I've done quite a lot of work for France, and it came quite as a shock to me the respect that comic work is held in France, and also, of course, in the United States too. It's Britain where it's like, so you write comics, do you? Do you draw them as well? I mean, that's that kind of. It's not a real job, is it?
Well, I mean, you only have to look at. I was reading an article of yours actually on Millsverse yesterday about there was the reaction to Charlie's War, the celebration of World War One in Great Britain, and they didn't actually have yours in the British, one of the British museums.
Yeah. Now but you see, and that's the thing there, and it saddens me that the censorship on those centenary years has not been picked up by anyone. Well, obviously it's not, because they did a very good job on it. It isn't just the, if you like, regarding Charlie's War as insignificant, that attitude to comics. It was also a deliberate act of censorship, and shame on all the people concerned, because there's all my other comic books at the British Library, Slain and so forth, and Charlie's War is just not there. And this is meant to be supposedly an exhibition of how comics have become sophisticated, adult, and are challenging society in various ways. And of all my stories, I would say Charlie's War is the most direct in doing that. So yeah, I was bitterly disappointed that it was consciously overlooked by the British Library, and it made me aware of just how powerful the state is. I think, again, it's the prettifying of 1984. It is a prettified 1984, and we are in a state which does control information. And you'll know from referring to that article that, Charlie's War has been promoted in France and, exhibitions at the equivalent of the Imperial War Museum. And museums in the trenches as well. But yeah, in Britain, let's just keep the lid on this, because we do not want people to know that World War One was not the patriotic and honourable war that presumably kids are still being told it was. In other words, it was a tragedy, but it was necessary, all the usual nonsense that they try to persuade people to sacrifice their lives for.
Dulce decorum est pro patre more, if I haven't slaughtered that statement.
No, you've got it spot on, yeah.
A terrible war. It wasn't good. It was called the Great War, but it wasn't great. It's an ironic statement.
No. And particularly, I think, in the British Isles, in Ulster, I think it was, the cost to people in Northern Ireland was particularly awful. I can remember that from during the centenary years. The BBC got in touch with me because they were aware of the huge cost of soldiers from Northern Ireland, and particularly I think on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. And so they were talking to me about doing some kind of documentary which would link into Charlie's War and so forth. And it got past the first two hurdles, didn't go beyond that. And that's a commonplace I've found with Charlie's War. You'll find researchers or junior producers will take an interest in it and say, hey, we'd like to do this, this, or this. And then when it goes upstairs to the higher level at the BBC, no, we're doing something else. There's a blanket censorship that goes on in the British state, which is really quite chilling.
Such a shame, because it would make an amazing series.
Well, it's been, another good example of that, of course, is it was actually optioned by a major TV production company. The one who did I think think it was the one who did the TV series Call the Midwife. So then they optioned Charlie's War as a TV series, probably, let's say, 18 months or so before the centenary. And you can see why they would do it. You know, it would press all the right buttons, but it never flew. And that would almost certainly be because they've got to find an outlet for it. So what's it going to be? Is it going to be BBC, Channel 4, Sky, ITV? There's only four options there, and they obviously, you know, despite all their connections, all their skills in marketing and so on, they couldn't get it to fly. I think that tells you a great deal.
Is that the British state's view of comics and things? Is that why characters like Martial Law and I suppose Judge Dredd, they're often set in America because it's a lot easier for people to look at, oh, it's an American issue, not realising that it's in fact talking about British issues as well?
Yeah, I think sometimes with it's almost like it's a broad canvas with the States. Britain can sometimes seem a little insular, and I think Harry Potter has changed that a lot, hasn't it? Because it's so British. Do you know what I mean? And there is all these incredibly successful Hollywood movies. So when I did Space Warp, I really set out to change that. So, you know, I have this very British establishment in outer space, an orbiting boarding school, if you like, kind of a space version of Hogwarts, except it's not very nice. It's a pretty evil place to be in. And then another, I think, relevant example. I was going to do a kind of Holocaust, post Armageddon story, and I was thinking about dinosaurs and so on, and I suppose I was thinking of New York or San Francisco or Los Angeles, you know, the usual settings. And my wife Lisa pointed out at some point, why does it always have to be the States? You know, we have fantastic, incredible cities and culture here. And so on later versions, I changed it. This was Jurassic Punks.
Yeah.
I changed it to Liverpool because Liverpool is an amazing place. You know what I mean? It's an amazing culture. And so I think that was an important move. And I mean, you think of all those other incredible cities in Britain that we've got, and how they would be science fiction scenarios, whereas certainly in the heyday of martial law, you know, it's set in San Futuro, which is San Francisco. So I'm thinking offhand, for example, of Glasgow. I mean, you know, I can't off the top of my head think of any famous comic series or well-known comic series set in Glasgow. But hey, it's just like Liverpool, you know, there's huge potential in it. I mean, probably what I would do is what I always do on these things is, you know, I don't believe in faking it. I would, in some capacity or another, consult perhaps a Glaswegian, so I could not put my foot in it somewhere, because there's nothing than someone portraying Scottish people in a what could be seen as a cartoony or comic-y way. You know, you've got to get it right, and in order to do that, you've got to really understand the culture. So it's reminding me, for instance, when I wrote Third World War, that I knew that I had to cover black issues in London in an urban environment. And I thought, my God, if I do this on my own, you know, whatever I say, I am going to get screwed by this. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there was only really one way to do it, and I think, which was I wrote it with a black co-writer who, and as a result, we could say things. This is Alan Mitchell, the late Alan Mitchell, and I. We could say things that individually neither of us could possibly have said. It was quite outrageous. He could say things, coming from an urban Afro-Caribbean background about social security and so forth, that I wouldn't have dared say. So I think authenticity is always the thing, wherever the story is based.
Pat, you're famously not a fan of superheroes.
Yeah.
But we now live in an age where, for the last 15 years, it feels like, that they are almost at the core of our cultural identity in terms of, cinema releases. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is just this juggernaut that is, consuming everything within its way. How have you coped with that?
Well, quite easily. I don't watch them. Lisa, my wife, will tend to watch them, or would watch them, because I think she has a point of view that many people have. It's just entertainment. It's just a bit of fun. Well, with my particular background, I can't really see them that way. I'm looking for examples of real heroism, which I think can be expressed in superheroes and so forth, and they are. I'm trying to remember the particular one. Don't hold me to this, but I think it may have been an Avengers one where all these people were dying as a result of some action of one of the Avengers. It may have been Iron Man, or it may have been someone else, and there was no moral response to it. There was no sense of, oh my God, what have I done? So what you're seeing is lots of lives lost, and there's no question about it. There's no challenge on it, and of course that's my real beef with superheroes, is that they are a betrayal of the word hero, and we are programmed to, and it's deliberate. It's a deliberate propaganda exercise, and the connection between the American state and Marvel and Hollywood is I think quite well documented now. I mean, if I was to say this 10 years ago, it probably seemed like some weird conspiracy theory, and now everyone says, yeah, it's true, so what? So it's all a travesty of the meaning of heroes, and as a result, we devalue real life heroes, who I am endlessly fascinated by. Charlie's War, of course, being a case in point. All those ordinary soldiers in the trenches, for the most part, they were genuine heroes, and but it's like, well, they don't count. You've got to have a bright costume, and you've got to have a mate, and that's the definition of a hero. That's quite unhealthy propaganda, because it's saying to anyone coming into it that a kid, that the mark of a hero is how much power you have to inflict on other people, which the United States, of course, does. So all over the world, and notably in the Middle East. So I suppose that's one aspect of martial law that would be rather different today. The emphasis is now far more on the Middle East than it was when it began, there was still more of a connection to South America. Although with Venezuela and so forth, perhaps it might circle back there as well.
certainly your space work comic it's heroes. It's ordinary people who find themselves in unique circumstances who've been changed. But there's
Yeah.
no, it's not a superhero comic at all.
No, and yet everyone concerned is involved in fantastic adventures and involving a lot of, what should we say, personal effort, personal courage, and heroism, and so forth. So it works, and I mean, although it's aimed at all ages, it has worked particularly well when we can reach them. The legendary Generation Z. It's a very, very challenging generation who I'm totally fascinated by, because they are the same but different to earlier generations, as is always the case.
But one thing Joe mentioned to me, prior to this, is Space Warp. It feels like a return to comics of the 70s. It is. I mean, I'm presuming this was a conscious decision there, where everything is possible, and there's a more socially conscious feel. Is that because there are parallels perhaps between the generation today and those in the 70s?
I suppose it's a number of factors that really came together in Space Warp. It's certainly not. It's not a nostalgia comic. And nostalgia is a tricky word anyway. I mean, what does that actually mean? Is it nostalgia for the 70s, or is it reflecting the tastes of people who were kids in the 70s and are now in midlife? What I wanted to do was to say, if I was going to do 2000 AD today, how would I do it? Warp is the result, and I know 2000 AD are aware of that audience that isn't being served, and so you have 2000 AD regened, which is attempting to press that button, and so it's the idea of a comic for all ages. So it means that it won't be overly adult in certain aspects, and perhaps it has the optimism that maybe was there in which is probably not there today. So those are all things to play for, I think, and in particular, well, I suppose the two things for me, and it's surprising how they're often overlooked. Well, the first one was, of course, that with 2000 AD, we introduced a group of new, diverse British artists, and who are now seen rightly as as kind of comic art superstars. And so I wanted to do the same thing with a group of to give them an opportunity to come to the fore. And I think if you were to compare some of the artwork in the early 2000 AD alongside Space Warp, I think you would find that they're of similar quality and standard. So that was one of the objectives for it. And then, of course, the other one, which again is so important, it's astonishing. I mean, martial law is great because it's copyright owned by Kevin and I. So, if anything happens to it in the future, we benefit. But that's not the case on 2000 AD. And you have a system whereby you sell all the rights, which is prehistoric. It's absolutely prehistoric. And so I wanted to show that you can have a creator-owned comic which can generate enough sales to pay the creators, and it can work for everyone concerned, and that has been the case. And it's to show there is an alternative, that we don't have to have this actually Dickensian system that is prevalent in British comics at this time.
I remember actually years ago at a convention, and Rebellion had released Strontium Dog again in these fancy hardback editions, and John and Carlos were there doing signings, and I asked them would they sign that book, and John said to Carlos, "Did you know that they had reprinted this again?" Carlos said no. So the fact that they no longer had the rights to their own creations, and they didn't even know what was being printed and what was out on the market again, I actually find that really sad. I was quite embarrassed, to be honest, at the time. I felt so bad that I was handing them something they weren't even aware of.
Yeah, it's so often the case. I have had exactly the same situation where I'm often totally unaware of what they're doing and how it's being reprinted, and of course also have any kind of control over it. Never mind the fact that you're not properly rewarded financially for it. It can have an inappropriate cover or a caption or whatever. Whereas if the book is creator owned, almost by contract, the publisher will show you the cover and make sure you're happy with it, and the text on the back and so forth. But none of these things happen. It's it's good for fans, for readers growing up, but because all the editions are out there. I mean, some quality and others are not so high quality. But it does feel like it's strip mining the past. They're working their way through it, and I think perhaps having gotten hold of most of the low-hanging fruit, they've kind of moved on to the rest of British comics. Things like Trigon Empire and The Spider and so forth. But it's not nurturing and recognizing the creators in the way that you've exampled. And of course, there are many other manifestations of that as well.
It is a pity, because the fans don't realise that you have actually been taken advantage of. The creators have been taken advantage of, and it's not until something like Space War is out there that is creator owned that people realise that actually that there's two sides. There are creators who are free to do what they want and actually are paid a living wage for it, hopefully, and then the other side is where the establishment is actually making money from these creators.
Yeah, it's sad, really, and I suppose that's what drove me really to do Space War, because as you doubtless know, I've been ranting about this whole subject for some time, but I'm very much a lone voice on this because people are intimidated, and they often won't speak out because they fear that the publisher won't use them again. And that's probably a justified fear. I think because of my particular, background, stretching all the way back to childhood, I don't care. You know what I mean? I will still speak out, and to hell with the consequences. And sometimes there are consequences. But I think that's why, another reason why I did Spacewalk was I thought it's a good way of demonstrating. In other words, I'm putting my money where my mouth is and actually doing it and showing it can work and so forth. And also it's giving something back to the industry. I mean, I think anyone who in any line of work, if you've been in it for a long time, you want to pass something on, and you want to put something, give something back, and encourage people. to go in a particular direction, especially when it's the general consensus is that where British comics are concerned is that it's kind of closing in on itself. It's becoming more and more of a hobbyist thing. And whilst areas like manga seem to be doing quite well, traditional British comics have disappeared off the map. So I don't know. It's and again, coming back to Generation Z, I couldn't be 100% sure of this, but I'm fairly sure because I need to understand these things because that's the audience that that I particularly would like to reach because after all, that's where comics generation. I think for the most part, despite all the technology that they've grown up with, they like paper too. You know, it's not a given that they will. I mean, they might be on Instagram or TikTok all the time and so on, but they don't necessarily want to view a comic in that way. I mean, I think the jury's still out there, but the feeling I have for the most part is they still like paper.
It's hard to beat paper. The feel of it and even the smell. But that actually leads on to the question, will there be a Space Warp episode 2?
I think at some point, as always, I think with all creators, I have at any one time like half a dozen different projects on the go. But what slowed me down in particular on Space Warp is Lisa and I having to take time out to actually look at marketing and to understand it. And the only way to do that, even if it turns out to be a cul-de-sac, and some of them have, is you've got to try one thing and then another. So and so for instance, let's say Facebook. Now, although supposedly Facebook is not viewed by anyone under 30, that isn't entirely true. That there is a younger audience who do look at Facebook. And so we had to check that out. And they don't particularly respond to adverts. What they do, and this is a whole challenge of social media, is get a lot of very encouraging responses and a lot of involvement and interaction, but they don't necessarily buy through systems like Instagram, Facebook, and so forth. So it takes time to go through that. And the alternative, which would be to just ignore that and just plow ahead with Spacewalk 2, would mean that you're putting to one side that younger audience. Now, the result of that would be that the stories would tend to become more and more, not so much adult, but appealing to older readers. And I want to keep that link to younger readers. I mean, there's a very specific difference between them. And this is broad brushstrokes, but I think it's true. Younger readers, let's say a 13-year-old, they like really fast-moving, intense, condensed stories. You probably, both of you remember that from your time of reading comics. But as you get older, this does sound rather creaking and geriatric. Imagine what it's like for me. The readers like stories to move at what they would describe as a smoother pace, and critics might describe as at a slower pace. In other words, take it a bit more gently. And there's a very pronounced difference between those two things. So if at the moment a large part of the Spacewalk audience is very supportive, readers of your generation and older, you've got to balance that with the audience that I've got a percentage of, for example, through readers who have passed it on to their children. or you of course you'll always have a number of 11 and 12-year-olds who are curious about what's out there and will find space warp. So what I'm trying to say there in a very long-winded way is that there's a lot of research to do there, and some of it's worked and some of it hasn't. I would encourage all creators to go down similar roads to me. In other words, self-publish. And I think so many people go in for crowdfunding, which is absolutely fine and so forth. But it's not a road that I wanted to take, because I wanted it to the funding to come from, if you like, grassroots audience rather than from, if you like, the Patreon factor. But self-publishing is possible. And what the particular system we use to kick off each new IP is to use print on demand, and so there's no capital outlay. So it means if you're you can get your comic out there and you have not got to pay a penny for printing, whereas everyone seems to think, oh, you've got to pay a printer. Not in the first instance. If the book is successful enough, which Space Warp is, so now we can afford to look at a printer and say, right, let's do a print run for say Diamond, the distributor, or let's do a print run for W.H. Smith's. And then of course we've got to think, oh my God, there's COVID. Are we going to get a third wave? So you can feel my head. Is it going to be like France, where things are going to change in the summer? We'll have to proceed with great caution. But coming back to what you were saying about branded, it means that as creators, we have to have all these extra skills, and that's not easy for any of us, especially someone like me who's been just writing away in a garret my entire life. You have to develop these new skills, like the way that you came in. You signed up and you got your copy of Branded. Those are quite challenging, I think, for a lot of freelance writers and artists, and that's where a publisher like Rebellion scores, because it says, look, we'll take all those problems away from you, and we'll just pay you such and such amount of money, and we'll do all the rest, and we'll also take the lion's share of the profits. And so that's why I don't know that many people will be queuing up to follow my example. It would probably have to be such a hit that people would say, oh yeah, I'm going to do that now. You know what I mean? But that's the only time these things happen, where if it's making so much money, then people will say, okay, we've got to do this ourselves. Which would be nice if that ever happens. We'll see.
There was a real resurgence of self-published comics in the 90s. I think because at that time Marvel were facing bankruptcy, and DC had sort of dropped the ball when it came to the death of Superman, because he came back again, and there seemed to be an awful lot of self-published comics in the late 90s, and it was a real feeling of creativity at that time, and I keep hoping that we'll maybe go back to that again, that people will be able to find something different out there than the norm.
Yeah, it would be. I think the 90s one was particularly interesting, wasn't it? Because it was very artist-led, if I recall. You had all these great American artists.
Todd McFarlane with his image imprint, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think they were very daring, all those guys, and it's a bit dismaying to think that that really suggested this great renaissance, and now it's gone full circle again. Perhaps it's always a case of boom and bust. Maybe that's the nature of publishing and comics in particular. That's always going to keep rising and falling, and you just got to recognize that it runs in cycles.
It is a pity because I'm thinking of something like Evan Dorkin's Milk and Cheese, which I can highly recommend anyone check out. And it was Arnica in a page, but it was also reflecting society in a quite a unique way. And I just don't see anything like that anymore. Everything
That's,
is
yeah,
DC's just pared down back now to its basic heroes, whereas they would have had the Vertigo imprint before, and of course there was the move in the 80s by an awful lot of the British creators into the American comics because British the British style and the insight into storytelling was celebrated at that point.
yeah. It's at this point in time, it's not a bright time, really, is it? Because, again, not least because with COVID, there aren't the conventions that there were. And I mean, it's great that you guys are doing this. So, at least we've got a digital convention. And I imagine that's going to carry on for some time. This is the way forward. There's always challenges, though, and I think I don't know. For me personally, when I started in the not so much on the girls' comics side of things, because girls' comics, as I've talked about many times in the past, girls' comics were incredibly buoyant. They actually outsold male comics by 2 to 1. But when I came into the male comics arena, the general tone at that time was nothing works. Everything's going to the wall. It's all over. Whatever we do, it will fail. And they really were saying, and this is in the mid 70s, kids aren't buying comics anymore. So that was my introduction to the industry. And so you can imagine today it's very much a sense of deja vu. And so often that when I come across that same tone today, I flash back to 1975, and that's why I ignore it, because I think actually there's an element of defeatism in not amongst you, the readers and the fans, but amongst the professionals. There is a strong element of defeatism. Nothing works anymore. It's all over. And the golden age is always in the past. And because I've always grown up with that, I've always resisted it. So my mantra is always, perhaps a little optimistically, the golden age is right here, right now. Never mind 20 years ago. It's hot now. That takes a bit of persuading, but I think it's a good way of looking at things.
Is there a case with professionals, perhaps, that there's an expectation now that you haven't made it until your comic is picked up and turned into something like a Snowpiercer or The Boys or something from Mark Millar? Because it feels almost like that's the ultimate sign of success now, is to have it adapted. But I think that takes away from the idea, and I think the stated fact that the comics are a legitimate art form in of themselves. They don't need to be adapted.
Well, and of course, there's many criticisms of when a comic book is adapted into a movie. They don't always get it right, shall we say? Judge Dredd being a case in point. I think probably for all of us as professionals, there's probably one. There's one way of recognizing it. Whatever you're into, is, are you making enough money at it? Are you making reasonable money, good money, or great money? And so it might appear that if you are getting a film made or whatever, that would be fantastic financially. That's often not the case. I mean, Hollywood is a jungle, believe me. I mean, I've had quite a few characters optioned, and as we speak, I've got American Reaper is optioned with Steven Spielberg's company, Amblin Entertainment, and Accident Man was made into a low-budget movie and so forth. But I mean, yeah, it does generate income, but it's not in my experience, at least, life-changing income. And I don't think that's unique. Maybe it's just about ego then. If I've got a film made of my book or whatever, I would say, financially speaking, the best role model is the French. Requiem Vampire Night, which was originally a 2000 AD proposal, rejected by 2000 AD because they claimed that time running backwards, which was one of the high points of the story, had been used in science fiction novels and therefore wasn't valid in Requiem. But that makes more money, in more income even now when it's really not at its high point than anything on 2000 AD. So for me, as a professional, doing something for France is the way to go. And I suppose that for some Brits, maybe working on a prestigious Marvel or DC character would probably generate, or what it used to generate, a lot of income. I'm not so sure it does anymore, because I think both Marvel and DC, their titles are not in a great place, apart from maybe their top 10. So I don't know. It's perhaps if people are really just seeing it purely in financial terms, they're almost always going to be chasing their tail, because there's no idealism behind what they're doing. So for me, if I produce something like Spacewalk, for instance, and there is a lot of idealism, obviously, behind it, that's rewarding, and it works and so forth. But the prime thing is that it reflects something that I should be doing as a writer. Whereas if you're only thinking, well, if I get a Batman gig, I could get all these, thousands of dollars in royalties or something. Well, good luck to them, but I don't think it feeds your soul. And at the end of the day, that's actually more important than anything else.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the older you get as well, the more you appreciate time and the sort of soft benefits, as they would be seen, rather than the hard cash.
That's a very good way of putting it. And you as you say, the older you get, you become more aware of it. And if you don't, then it will make you aware of it. Do you know what I mean? It's not something you necessarily have any choice in. I think that came as a surprise to me in midlife, realizing that you can't just say, oh, it's just about making money and I'll do this gig or that gig. You suddenly realize that what you might call your life purpose or having a purpose in life is relevant as well. And I would say, and this applies to anything, doesn't it? We're getting a bit philosophical here. You ignore it at your peril.
Yep, totally agree. That there's only a finite time that you have, and you need to fill it with things that make you happy, and
it's got to have
feeds the soul.
Yeah. Just making money is not enough. I think most of us, or certainly I did when I was younger, thinking, well, it's making money. What does it matter? But it does matter, and you have to address these things.
I wanted to ask. SF1 in Spacewalk references bacteria fighting against a human host. I don't want to say it was a happy accident. Was this inspired by the pandemic, or was this just an idea that kind of came to?
It was actually a happy accident, because it was written before the pandemic, definitely, and yeah, it was a happy accident. I wanted an enemy that I didn't want to pick. I wanted an enemy that we could fear and even hate, and also could raise interesting philosophical questions. In other words, you're hating the enemy within. We've all got these bacteria and bugs within us, and it's one of those deep subjects. And I just know, and it's another reason for having not just Spacewalk 2, but 3, 4, 5, and 6, and so on, because that's going to take quite some getting into, particularly on a group story. But I think that's one of the rewarding things about having a genuine villain. They're not really a villain, but and obviously, I think all of us regard COVID in very sort of angry terms, shall we say? I mean, because it's really screwed up all our lives.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the idea that the Earth was first colonized by bacteria, and the message at the end of SF1 is they want their planet back.
Yes, that did make me laugh. The fact that we're the bad guys because we've ruined it so much that they think it's about time we took this back from you. You aren't in any fit state to look after it. We have to have it again.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I know I'm lying. If I really get into this, I'm going to start, reading obscure books on the nature of bacterial intelligence and so on, which I've always been kind of fascinated by. This idea that the gut, where all the bacteria are, is the second brain, and the source of all our emotions and so forth, versus the intellect, where as far as I know, there's no bacteria in the brain. They're all down there in the gut. And so when you have an exhilarating or a traumatic experience, that's where you feel it. You feel it in the gut, so I mean, these are things I love to explore, and it's also a challenge for me as a writer to get these kind of ideas across without being polemic and without being worthy, and also for a younger audience. Although, once again, the general consensus is that younger readers are more open to such left field ideas than older readers. I mean, again, that's broad brushstrokes, and there are, I'm sure, numerous examples on either side where some kid will say, "Oh, I read SF1, I thought it was stupid." You know what I mean? You can get that kind of reaction as well. But for the most part, it's quite an enthralling idea that you can, pass these sort of ideas on to a 12-year-old, and it's possibly going to stay with them all their lives. And I don't think about it too much, but it does give me some sense of satisfaction that knowing that that's possible.
Well, the hope is that the younger generation are more open to LGBTQ issues and excuse me, and climate change and those things that would improve society that maybe the older generations are still stuck in the mud with.
Yeah, and again, it's an area I hope to do a lot more on in Spacewalk 2, particularly with Hellbreaker, where you've got this demon. He's a guy who went to hell and he's escaped from hell. And he is the #1 influencer on Instagram. Now, I find the idea of pursuing that really fascinating, and I can't wait to get back to that. In fact, having this conversation is actually nudging me towards space.
I really like that character. He was my favorite. I have to say, he was my favorite. I love H.U.'s artwork for SF1, but I really liked Hellbreaker.
Yeah, I think Hellbreaker presses that button of it's a modern day villain, and yet he also stands for something good. But to the best of my knowledge, that whole business of exploring influencers and so on hasn't really been done in comics that I'm aware of. And I'm thinking of the potential there, the way that we're all aware that if someone comes out with a view on social media that is unacceptable in Silicon Valley, they will be cut off. Do you know what I mean? You come across websites where they will say, do you really want to go to this website? Because, they have a different view on COVID that has been proven to be false, et cetera, et cetera. So I really want to explore how far he can appeal to this this audience with his ideals and ideas, and how far the establishment is going to block him. And obviously, I shall be drawing on real life to see exactly how they'll do it. It's a modern day challenge, isn't it? Whatever your views are, ideas are censored, and I'm curious to see more on that.
And as I said, this has been an amazing discussion, and I've really enjoyed this. I mean, to bring it to something of an end, we're hopefully getting Spacewalk 2 soon. I don't suppose we will see any more martial law now that Kevin has retired. But what else can we expect from you, Pat? What do you see it coming from you? What stories do you want to tell?
Right. Okay. Well, I haven't got a publication date on it yet, but I am working on completing Kiss My Axe, the inside story of Slain, the secret history of Slain. I haven't got that long to go on it. So, that's been taking up quite a lot of my time. And I think because, as you may know, Slain has come to an end, actually, I think literally this week in 2000 AD, I think it's the right time to bring out a book covering the whole, the whole nature of Slain, how it began and how it ended. So that's one project. ABC Warriors actually is a similar finale thing, really. Because as you probably know, for about the last 5 years, Joe Pineapples, as rendered by Simon Bisley and now with Clint Langley, has been on the stocks, and I have to write that. I have to complete that, and that will again be the final ABC Warriors. So there's a lot of closure on some things, which I suppose sounds a little depressing, but I don't see it that way. I think it's important for characters to go out while they're winning. There's a wretched tradition in British comics where characters sort of carry on to an ignominious end. You know what I mean? Where they're kind of a shadow of their former selves.
Endings are very important. So many stories start fantastically well, and as you say, just meander, and because they don't want them to come to an end. And I think it's very important that stories are given a good ending. A poor ending can. Game of Thrones, you give it a poor ending, no one cares about it. You have to have a good end.
Did it have a good ending? I'm not up to speed on Game of Thrones.
No, it didn't. It had an atrocious ending, and now we have, as a society, decided it never existed.
No, which is such a pity. Such a pity. As somebody who does Cersei Lannister, it's a real pity now. When I put the costume on, it's kind of spoiled slightly.
Yeah.
Oh, that is a great shame. Well, I think comics are particularly bad at this because often they'll milk a character until there's nothing left, and I'll tell you this. In publishing, they actually use terms like killing the golden goose and so on, which is not a healthy way of referring to someone's intellectual property. So they actually see it in monetary terms. So it's like, can we squeeze a bit more out of this character? That's not nice. And then, of course, you have, is it Marvel, where they regularly reinvent characters every, 15, 20 years or something, and just keep bringing them back. So I think it's I think it's incumbent upon us as Brits, if you like, to be a little more aesthetic about these things and to say it's not about money. It's about ending things properly. So Slane, in my view, ends appropriately where he's on and up. He's got challenges ahead of him, but that's where he's at, rather than a tragic death or something. I like to think that a character like that lives on in the reader's consciousness, and it will be the same with the ABC Warriors. There won't be some tragic finale, and I think it's also good to end where there's still energy around the characters, where you're thinking, oh no, it can't end yet because there's all these great stories still to be told, and I think that's a nice point for the character to end on, rather than, oh, thank God that's over. I couldn't believe there's more still to come on it. So, that's certainly how I'm approaching characters. And of course, the reason I'm closing them down isn't just because I think they've reached an appropriate end, but because of things like Space Warp. There's only so much time I've got to devote to these things, and so Space Warp really has to be the focus of my attention just now.
Well, I as you say, it's sad things come to an end, but I'm looking forward to reading them and seeing how they come back. And I love the idea that they will, continue. I think that's important as well. You don't have to end it bleakly, and you don't have to end it with everyone dying. Just bring the story to an end, close the book, put it on your shelf, and pick it up again in a few years, perhaps. Where can people find you, though, Pat, online? I know, obviously, you have the Mills verse, but where is Space Warp, and where are your socials at?
Right. Well, Pat Mills Comics on Twitter. God, you can see how bad I am at this. I'm stumping. Where am I? SpaceWarpComic.com, I think, should take you to the Space Warp website. And of course, Space Warp itself is available on Amazon, and it's also available from Get My Comics. I think they've got a number of signed editions, with a book plate in, available as well. And of course, as I say, on Amazon, it's available not just as paper, but also, probably if you're not a Brit, digitally. In other words, you can download a copy as well. That's pretty much where everyone can find me, I think. And just Googling me, it should take someone quite easily to.
Yeah, there's a definitive edition of Martial Law came out a couple of years ago, I believe. Is that still in print?
I believe so, yes. I mean, there's actually two versions. One is the hardback, which came out, what would it be, 7 or 8 years ago, I think, maybe now, perhaps even longer. Time really does fly. And then there's the softback, which is obviously cheaper. And they're both very much still out there. And there is, I referred to a martial law text novel, but that's not in print. There probably are odd copies around somewhere. But of course, for most martial law fans, you're looking for Kevin's art as well. There is a text novel, but it's not going to keep you guys happy. There's not enough of
I have them all. I actually have an edition as well, a hardback edition, and I think it was maybe out beginning of the 2000s, and it's actually signed by you and Kevin. Pride of Joy it is. I think that you only made so many of them, so I thought, yes, I have to definitely have one of those, and I do have the novel as well, and plus all the spin-offs that you did, even with Savage Dragon and Pinhead, and Hellraiser. You name it, I have it. If it's martial law, I'll have it.
That's fantastic. That's really fantastic.
And Joe, where can people find you?
Well, on the socials, as you call them, I'm on Facebook, Hedge Scout, and as well Instagram, I'm Hedge Scout. And actually, my Twitter is also Hedge Scout. Seeing a theme here. You'll find me sometimes on Talking Codswallop podcast and Banterflix podcast as well. Yes, my sense of humour on my various pages is somewhat, let's just say, different.
It is unique.
Joanne, have we linked up on Twitter at all?
Yes, in fact, you've shared a couple of my martial law photographs before too.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That'll save me making a note just now. If we're already linked up there, that's great.
Yeah, in fact, what I'll do, Pat, is I'll send you some. I got some great photographs done last year by a couple of local photographers. Robert Malone Photography and Morbid Pixel Photography did some great photographs of martial law. So I'll send them through to you on Twitter, along with some of Johnny Fisher in his dread gear and me dressed in my various judges. Because if I didn't send you something of Johnny's, he would excommunicate me.
I know he would. Yeah, no, I'd love to see them both. I really will, and I'll with your approval, I'll retweet them or the links
yes,
or
please.
whatever. Yeah.
Love that. Yes, please. That would be great.
I just want to thank you both for this. This has been a wonderful discussion. Pat, you're more than welcome to come back anytime if you want to talk. Anything you like. Please, we'd love to have you here. I'll make sure Joe's available.
Oh, yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Andy. And yeah, when I've got some new developments on something, I probably will take you up on that.
No, please do. I look forward to it. This podcast has been produced as part of the Lawless Comic Convention, a comic convention for fans to meet the artists, writers who work on their favourite characters in British comics. Everything from 2000 AD to the Beano, from Sentinel to the 77th. And this year, 2021, it's a digital convention where you can find podcasts and videos from all your favourite artists, writers, colourists, editors, the people that brought your favourite works to life. So do go and check that out. It's at lawlesscomiccon.co.uk. It's also on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and all those wonderful things in the show notes. You can find more from me over at rogue2media.com, where I host both this show, The Great Derelict, but also Into the Expanse, the Grand Prix podcast, and many, many other wonderful podcast shows. Do check those out. You can find the show on Twitter at Great Derelict. I'm on Twitter at Andy3E. And there will be an extended version of this discussion on the Great Derelict podcast feed in about a week or so. But yes, one last time, thank you both for this. It's been a delight. And we'll leave it there.
All right. Thank you, guys.
I am just smiling here. Thank you so much, Pat. And thank you, Andy, for getting me involved.
And that just leaves me to say, I should go.